Welcome, everybody, and happy Friday. You are at the Grantmakers for Education Out of School Time Impact Group monthly convening, and we will give everybody a chance to get settled and get their, I don't know, your audio, your video, close a couple of other windows on your screen so we can reduce multitasking, which I think science says is not even a thing, even though probably most people's jobs require it. But it would be great for all of us to kind of dig in and spend some time with each other for this hour. This meeting is for 1 hour. So I'm Kathleen Trapphagen, and I co-facilitate the EdFunders Out of School Time Impact Group along with Rebecca Goldberg. And we are happy that you are here. Today, we will be talking about playing the long game for the youth development workforce, supporting pay equity, high quality jobs, and strengthening nonprofit providers. And we have a couple of really interesting, ambitious, and innovative examples that we're going to dig into today. And we'll have plenty of time for you to be asking questions and get into the conversation as you would like. So first, we're going to start out, as we usually do, with an intro question for everybody to answer in the chat. And also, could you change your Zoom name to include your pronouns and your organization? That helps us as a community get to know each other. We're pretty large, but we do have a nice, consistent group of people who come to these monthly meetings. And part of what we'd really like to do is give you an opportunity to meet new people, develop connections, etc. So that helps us if we can see what people's pronouns and organization is right on your Zoom. So take a minute to do that and then to answer the question in the chat. So the question is your name, your org, your pronouns, and what did you learn from a young person this summer? Before we opened up the meeting, we were having this conversation with the speakers, and it centered around things that young people say that we have no idea what they're talking about, and then they explain. So, and I think that that's actually probably one of those unlimited learning opportunities for people who may be in my age group, and maybe even, quite a bit younger also. So take a minute to share that. And I'm just going to do a bit of context setting for the conversation today. So we, as the Out of School Time Impact Group, have been talking about challenges in the out of school time workforce for quite a while. We've dug into various components of these challenges. I know many of you as practitioners, organizational leaders, policy people, researchers are deep into experiencing and coming up with solutions for many of the challenges. One of the major threads that really winds its way through this entire challenge is around building the capacity of nonprofits. And do nonprofit organizations have the capacity to pursue pay equity and offer high quality jobs in the youth development field? Part of that is because their challenge in doing that is that they're constrained by lack of access to adequate, flexible, and long-term resources. And we know that philanthropy has a big role to play in changing that dynamic. And so who we're talking to today are the funders and leaders of two initiatives that are tackling these issues head on. The first one is the Endeavor Fund, and that's a initiative that's based out of Bay Area in California, and the next one is Hub One, which is an initiative in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So I'm gonna, if we can bring on Chris, Sabaa, Danielle, and Pui Ling. So we're going to do these intros in pairs. We have a funder and a partner for each of the initiatives with us today. So Pui Ling Tam is the program lead in economic well-being for the Walter and Elise Haas Fund. And Sabaa Shoraka is Associate Director of Oakland Kids First. And so we're going to start out with you both to tell us who you are, what your organization is about, what you do, and a little bit about the Endeavor Fund, which is the initiative that we will be really digging into in this conversation today. And then we'll turn it over to Chris and Danielle to do the same.
Perfect. Thank you, Kathleen. So, hi, everyone. My name is Pui Ling Tam. I'm representing the Walter and Elise Haas Fund, and I'm connected with Sabaa Shoraka from Oakland Kids First through the Endeavor Fund. She and I will alternate our introductions. So I'm going to introduce myself. Sabaa will introduce herself, and then we'll talk about the Endeavor Fund a little. And Kathleen and I am tracking time. So for my self-introduction, and these are lenses and identities that I carry with me. I am a single mom raising a middle schooler and a high schooler in San Francisco. I am a Chinese American immigrant and a former executive director of a youth empowerment nonprofit recovering from that burnout. I'm 3 years into a job in philanthropy and about 3 decades into a career as a social justice educator. So that's what I bring with me. Today, I represent the Walter and Elise Haas Fund, where I lead our economic well-being program, and the Endeavor Fund is a part of that. I'll pass it to Sabaa.
Good morning. My name is Sabaa Shoraka. I use she, her pronouns, and I work for a nonprofit, Oakland Kids First, as associate director, and I've been involved with Oakland Kids First since 2018 in various roles. One of the things I think that's really meaningful with OKF is that, and part of the reason why I stick around for so long is that I really, it's in the name of it. We really put Oakland Kids first, and we are very student-centered. We show that by the way that we support our young people and our families. We also show by the way that we support our staff with doing direct service. And we also show that by the way that we are working in and outside of schools to be able to support our students' voices, that make sure that they're heard, and then making sure that the needs are also met. The mission of Oakland Kids First is to increase youth voice, leadership, and power to engage and create equitable schools where students can lead and learn. We were originally founded as a community coalition working together to secure city funds to support programs and services for young people in 1996. And then since then, we've been empowering high schoolers to amplify student voice and build student power to improve educational equity for themselves and their peers. In addition to that, we have our organization is focused on providing youth leadership development, youth organizing, community school services, and work-based learning opportunities to ensure that students have the resources to navigate inequitable conditions and support them to transform them. I'm really excited about this time right now to be able to share with you guys how OKF is providing our staff with fair and equitable wages. But we also believe it's deeper than just our staff getting paid well. It's also about a culture shift. It's about changing the infrastructure of nonprofit organizations and how they operate. I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thanks, Sabaa. So we're here representing the Endeavor Fund, which is a new initiative from the Walter and Elise Haas Fund. And to give you a little context, the Walter and Elise Haas Fund is a 71-year-old family foundation based in San Francisco and Oakland. And the Endeavor Fund was approved by a board this March and launched this year with several goals. One of them is for us as a foundation to operationalize our version of trust-based philanthropy. And the Endeavor Fund specifically has 3 principal tenets. The first is supporting organizations to close the racial and gender wealth gap. Second is increasing nonprofit well-being. And the third is for us, shining a light on what's possible in institutional philanthropy. In a nutshell, the ways that we wanted to do this and the ways we examined our role in the ecosystem were to say, we need to be funding solutions that are systemic, not only addressing the symptoms. We want to be doing work that de-silos our own work and recognizes the integration of work in the world and in nonprofits. And we want to move from making what we think have been contributions to commitments. So a little more context. Until about last year, our average size grant was $37,000 a year. And we're generally project support grants. We also know that there are 2 more pillars. that we need to center community, the community that we're here to serve, in all the decisions and choices and practices that we do and make. And two, that we aim to move into right relationship, which means repair work that we need to do as an institution and a foundation. And the shortest nutshell version of what we're here to do, our answer to how do we better play our role in the ecosystem, we said it's to fund nonprofits to win, and to win on their own terms. What this looks like is that our board approved 7 grants to 7 organizations for 7 years each, multi-year general operating, $3.5 million each. And they're general operating, and that is that. But we were clear about what our tenets are: closing racial and gender wealth gap and increasing nonprofit well-being. But Oakland Kids First is one of those organizations, and I'm very excited to be here with Sabaa. I think the other thing I'll say for the moment is that internally, it also means that we activated our 10-person team, so we're a 10-person foundation, because we recognize that our roles have to shift in order to support what's happening. And so our team has moved to support our grantees in 5 areas: beyond the grant support, communications, events, grant making, and then the 5th one is learning. I think I'm going to pause there. There's probably more to say, but I will leave it for later and let Sabaa talk about her perspective on the Endeavor Fund.
Yeah, Sabaa, do you have a couple of more things to say, right?
Not right now.
Oh, okay. All right, good. I have a few questions, but I'm going to hold them because we're going to get Chris and Danielle in the conversation too. Thank you so much for that. And just to say for participants, feel free to use the chat for any questions that are coming into your head right now. We will definitely get to them, but if you want to get those down because they're at top of mind, then go ahead. And also, if the speakers have an opportunity to just answer your question right in the chat, especially if it's a clarifying question, go ahead and put that in there. Okay, great. So thank you for this. Now we're going to go to Danielle Sielatycki. Did I get it?
Yeah.
And Chris Sargent. Thank you. So Chris Sargent is president and CEO of United Way of South Central Michigan. And Danielle is executive director of Prevention Works. They are working together on an initiative called Hub One. They're based in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So I'm going to hand it to you.
All right, I'll start. Glad to be here today. My name is Danielle Sielatycki, and I'm CEO of Prevention Works, which is a nonprofit in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We do prevention programs, violence prevention, social emotional health, mental health, substance abuse prevention with young people and families, both in and out of school time. I've been in my position for 27 years, so rooted in youth development and working with youth and families on positive outcomes. In my other job, I'm the lead executive of Hub One. Hub One was launched as an experiment about 4 years ago in Kalamazoo as a nonprofit collaboration between 4 organizations: Prevention Works, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Southwest Michigan, Boys and Girls Club of Greater Kalamazoo, and Urban Alliance. And it was really an experiment to take a look at how we could challenge and handle some of the sector issues that we were operating within, such as scarcity, funding issues, pay, turnover rates. And so we set out to tackle some of those sector issues. We initially partnered with a funding entity, the Stryker Johnson Foundation, who funded pilot funding for 3 years. We have also worked extensively throughout those 3 to 4 years with other funders, such as United Way, which is Chris here, who have stepped in and graciously contributed to the work that we're doing. So I'll kind of stop there and let Chris introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks for that. So Chris Sargent, CEO for United Way of South Central Michigan. We serve 6 counties in Michigan, including Kalamazoo in the south central part of the state. Been a part of United Way for, almost 25 years now. and one of 1,000 United Ways across the US and another 37 globally. So been a part of the United Way network for a long time. I would just, in the introduction, I think it's always important to highlight United Way. I think in many cases, in many communities, probably, hopefully you all have some relationships, is an organization that is about funding great critical nonprofit organizations and programs, and has been historically multi-year in funding, historically funding operations as well as programs. But I think we have to own and acknowledge we have not been good in our century-plus-year history of focusing around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and focusing on programs that serve marginalized and disparate communities, especially our BIPOC communities. So for a lot of United Ways, a lot of this work is newer. It is for us. We are still in our infancy of doing it. And we have great partners like Danielle, and I see Amy and Sarah as a part of Hub One organizations, and even Meg in our community with KidNet on the call today to really help learn and grow together. So we're fortunate that most of what we do in terms of funding, especially in this space, is really driven by our partners on the ground that suggest it, encourage it, and support it for us to grow and evolve as an organization.
So thank you for that. And folks, please do just contribute to the conversation in the chat as you want. So the next question is around what each of you hope to accomplish with these initiatives. And we can go, why don't we go to Chris and Danielle first? We'll continue with you, and then it can go to Pui Ling and Sabaa.
Well, for Hub One, it really started about 4 or 5 years ago with a group of nonprofit CEOs that were meeting for breakfast regularly to talk about some of our biggest pain points. And some of those were retention, hiring, low pay, HR strength, capacity building, investing into the professional development of our staff, infrastructure, not being able to afford effective infrastructure. So what could it look like if we shared infrastructure and costs, and also just funder relationships. So it was really intriguing for us to think about the trust-based philanthropy project and that philosophy on funding, and how we might be able to, as a collective group of nonprofits, look at how we might be able to work with local funders and even national funders to embrace that model of funding. And so one of the first things that was core to what we wanted to accomplish is tackle pay. We knew that we were not paying our employees the wages that they deserved, and that was affecting the ability for us to hire talent, and that in turn affected how our mission fulfillment worked. And so all of our organizations work with young people, and we felt strongly that it was extremely important to have talented people that were there for the long haul to be role models and a presence in young people's lives. And just for one example, one of the organizations within Hub One had a 400% turnover rate in their frontline staff working directly with youth. And that was shocking to us. And that was, really a light bulb that went on that said, like, we cannot keep functioning this way. So, working with funders and kind of a think tank group in the beginning of how can we start to have these open, transparent conversations with funders such as Stryker Johnson Foundation and United Way, and there's several others, to say, instead of investing in just programmatic, how can we start to look at how to invest on the inside of an organization to strengthen and build that in order to strengthen and build the mission fulfillment of our organization.
Yeah, thanks for that. And for Chris, from your perspective as a funder, what are your goals here?
Yeah, so I just dropped into the chat a link to our ALICE report, and the acronym that ALICE stands for. It's a real easy one to remember, so I always put it in the chat so people can see it. So we're one of 28 states in the U.S. where United Ways have come together to commission the ALICE report every 2 years. And we've been doing it quite some time now, for about 10 years. ALICE is really a measure of what's going on in the community in terms of people being able to survive and ultimately thrive from a household perspective. These are working families. It includes measures of those living below the federal poverty level. We know that's not a good indicator of sustainability or survival. And so the ALICE report really looks at what do folks need to make in terms of wages and having benefits for their household budget on a monthly basis. It won't surprise any of us on the call that most communities are struggling. So in Michigan, it's 4 in 10 households are below the ALICE threshold, meaning they're struggling to make ends meet on a monthly basis. So that report for us has been something that we've used organizationally in terms of our own wages and benefit considerations, working with for-profit companies to understand that when they're not paying sustainable wages and benefits, the community is trying to subsidize it, and it's not realistic for a community to subsidize for-profit wages. Working with policymakers to change policy to ensure that things like cliff systems of benefits are not helpful, and recognize that things like child tax credits that we've seen over the pandemic are some of the most single important resources that can come into households for ensuring that children don't live below poverty or below ALICE. So that's kind of a grounding resource for us and many of our nonprofit partners, including Hub One, to then say, okay, so what are we going to do about that in terms of our funding? So when we think about our funding, everything is focused on ALICE and equity, eliminating economic ALICE and racial disparities that exist in a community. And quite honestly, initially, we were doing a lot of program funding for client-based supports. And, with Hub One and some other partners really kind of lifting up and saying, and the sector is struggling. Like, we're critical to the community, and yet ourselves, we're struggling to pay folks, to Danielle's point, not have the retention issues that some of our partners have. So we have really tried to make sure that our funding isn't just program-based without being really supportive of the talent and the staff and the leadership that we need in community to be able to do that. And we've even tapped in most recently to some ARPA resources that I know all of us are probably pretty familiar with across the communities for local governments to actually fund United Way to provide more support out into the nonprofit sector, particular around wages and benefits.
That's interesting because you kind of, I think, touched on if folks are on the call and they're thinking, how do I begin to make the case to my local philanthropy network to do some shifting of strategy into this direction? You gave a little bit of a roadmap around understanding the economic importance of the nonprofit sector to the community and how to find out that data and how to understand, right? Like Danielle, you or somebody put in the chat, yeah, you did, that the majority of Hub One staff who are working frontline lived below ALICE. So that not only is the nonprofit sector critical to the economic health of the community, but then the people that are working in the nonprofit sector are also not actually making the wage that they need for a living wage, right? So which contributes to turnover, et cetera, and also at the end of the day connects completely to program quality, as you pointed out, that you need to have folks who are there and able to develop those consistent and healthy and positive relationships with young people, and you can't have so much turnover if you're going to be having that. So that's really interesting. I know there was a question about how do you get into the ALICE, and so maybe Chris, I'll leave that for you to you could answer that in the chat maybe, or somebody from United Way could do that, and then we can. But yeah, because I'm sure that there's probably quite a few people who'd like to know if their state is not one of them. Okay, so Pui Ling and Sabaa, I know you probably a lot of the things that Danielle and Chris just said resonate a lot, but also I think that your initiative has a couple of maybe somewhat differently conceived components to it around your goals. So I'd love to hear your answer to that, question of what are you trying to achieve with the Endeavor Fund? You talked a little bit about this in your intro, Pui Ling, but maybe dig a little deeper.
Did you want to go first or should I?
Yeah, you go first.
Well, I just want to, so we are a grassroots nonprofit, small grassroots nonprofit. Recently, in the last 4 years, we have doubled both our staff and our budget. And as we were doing this, we realized that infrastructure is such a huge thing. And building a strong infrastructure is a major part of what we're looking into doing right now, especially as we just received the Endeavor Fund. We're looking into hiring a development director, expanding our marketing communications to be able to develop a funding strategy that we are able to diversify our revenue, looking into growing our individual corporate giving, and then also our event-based giving. And I think another major part of it is looking into continuing to compensate and support our staff. This year specifically, we're looking into increasing our health benefits, because we realize it's not just about pay, it's also about everything else that goes along with pay. Living in the Bay Area, obviously it's very expensive. And then also just thinking about additional benefits that make these jobs a lot easier. One of the things that was a direct ask of our staff was getting additional mental health benefits. So we're looking into doing that for our staff. In addition to that, we work with a large population of students, about 500 students across all of our programs, and all those students are stipended through our programming. And then one of the things that we're looking into doing right now is that we're looking into moving some of our stipended programming into hourly wages, because we also realize that a lot of our students are either not part of programming or not even engaging in school because they have to go ahead and support their families financially. So we're looking into being able to do that. I think, Pui, if you want to go ahead, Pui, you want to go ahead.
Sure. I echo everything everyone has said. Like similar to what Danielle and Chris point out, there was a study done in San Francisco that projects that 3 out of 4 youth workers in San Francisco live below MIT's living wage calculator. And that's wrong. So there's a part of me that with the initiative is like, we just need to do right, or we at least need to do less harm. But it's also more specific it comes also from a place of having had to hire people and wanting to hire people to work with young people who had the competencies and shared lived experience and could make programming out of school time and in school a place of belonging. And we knew that we were looking for educators of color, people who had come through public schools. And we started hiring young people to do that and realizing that we were setting them up, right? We were setting young people up to do a really great job working with other young people and possibly to do that as adults. But if they continued in the profession of youth development or even teaching, they would be lucky to live on their own in San Francisco or Oakland. They would be lucky to be able to have statements. And that's just really messed up. So something needs to change. And then moving into philanthropy and being a funder, asking the question of how are we making our grants with purpose that recognize who we're responsible for. And so that's part of it. And then there's another piece of it, which is, how do we get out of nonprofits' way? Like I talked about trust-based philanthropy. And we could have made the Endeavor Fund grants and said everybody needs to raise their wages. But we are potentially then putting organizations in a really hard spot, right? And I see Danielle nodding, and I'm sure other people, because funds come from multiple places, and one funder alone make that change, even with a 7-year-long grant, which provides some space for expansiveness, some sense of sustainability. But again, that's only 7 years. And if government reimbursement rates don't change, if other funders don't change, what do you do? So that's why they're general operating grants. And what we're trying to do is follow what do our 7 grantees do, who are very different. Some are economic security organizations, some are youth organizing groups, right? Some have $2 million budgets, some have $10 million budgets. 2 of them have unions. How do you implement better jobs, including better pay, including better benefits? Like, what are the things you prioritize, and how can you do that? And how do we in our lane support you and support the conditions to make that possible? In 7 years, we think we can take steps towards that and hopefully have more comprehensive collective change.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it kind of makes me so we're focusing in on these steps that both of you have taken. I think you're somewhere between local / regional funders, right? You're not just in one city, but you have a region, but you're not a national funder though. And just something that I want everybody to think about of like, how can we think about how to help other local regional funders take these ambitious steps that you've taken, right? And then how can we maybe create, unless you already have it, some way that you all are connected into some type of, community of practice or group where you're learning from each other and moving together, and even thinking about what are ways that these type of initiatives could really spread, whether are there policy solutions that would help that, or is it really philanthropy influencing philanthropy? And there are many ways to do that. I'm just thinking about how do we really create opportunities for these type of initiatives to be in the hundreds or the thousands in communities across the country, and then really that becomes like a tipping point. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that. It's not directed to any one person, but anybody who has
I will say, Pui, I agree. 7 years, I mean, for Hub One, just to think about taking 4 nonprofits that have been in scarcity and paying low wages, don't have HR, and trying to get that startup of a compensation structure and process, which includes HR and job descriptions and org charts and all of that, is much longer than a 3-year pilot. And so one of the benefits with Hub One is that we did have 4 CEOs and 4 strong voices that were able to talk to funders. I think as a collective, I see Meg Blinkevich on here. And so Meg, I see you. And I know Meg is in charge of a group in Kalamazoo called KidNet, works with out of school time youth, putting standards in place, and a big collective of organizations that work out of school time. And I know that compensation, justice, and equity is important to Meg as well, and she's been a huge advocate for this. So having multiple voices, being able to talk to funders about this constantly has been, I've seen a shift in 3 years locally with funders, just from that alone, but also just funders being open to one of the questions that I know the Hub One CEOs asked ourselves in the very beginning was, how many of us think are going to be in this job in 5 years? And the answer was 0. And so I think that was telling as well, as, we did not have the supports and the resources and the capacity that we need, because we got 1 year, so many times we got 1 year programmatic funding that did not fund the operations of the organization and help us do compensation equity or wage justice, with all of the components that come with it. So I'll leave that there and let everybody else chime in. But
yeah, I might just add too, we know funders are fickle, right? So we love our next 3-year great idea, maybe our next 5-year great idea. We're committed to funding multiple years beyond the current grant of 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 years. And then there's a reality that says a lot of times we don't, and we change. And Pui Ling, I thought you said it really well, which is the human side of this, right? That our decisions not only impact the people and the community and the clients that we serve, but it impacts the real people who are leading that work. And I think we have to fundamentally keep driving back to that and being really honest and direct about it. It feels like after what we've been through over the last 3+ years, and some of the resource challenges that we're seeing, from individual giving being down nationally 2 years in a row, to market conditions causing endowments to be down and fundraising to be down for a lot of the nonprofit sector in particular, and even the funding sector as a result of that it's a good time to be really open and honest about, for 1 in 10 jobs are in the nonprofit sector nationally, and the critical nature of that and the importance of that during, and maybe as we're starting to come out of a pandemic. I think we just got to be simple in the conversation so that can happen. We also, as funders, have to take real ownership in this role. And so, for example, we have a funders group in Kalamazoo that meets every other month. And we are really talking right now about the resources that we don't have, that we did have, even with some of the, the federal dollars sunsetting or coming, to an end in terms of ARPA. So I think part of it is the funders got to have their conversations together, and whatever their networks are, to be really open and realistic about what the conditions are. Nonprofits have to be comfortable saying we are spokespeople on behalf of our organizations and the people that we serve. I will tell you, some of our initial conversations with Hub One, me and another colleague left a couple of those and went, well, they were pretty direct about that. And sometimes that's exactly what we need. We need to really understand it that way and hear it that way. So, because otherwise, we're going to sit at a trough of limited funds at times, and just be grateful for any piece that we can get, and that's just not a healthy relationship.
I just want to back up what Chris is saying too. I think one of the most amazing parts of the relationship with the Endeavor Fund has been that it's just been very honest from the very beginning of it. We've just, our first meeting together after we received funding was like, how do we want to work together, period. So I think that's kind of a different perspective on doing this work, especially with a funder, is that we came into it with like developing working agreements. And I've never been in a situation with a funder that they really focus in on that part first before even getting into the work of it, which I really appreciate. The way that the Endeavor Fund has approached this part of it was really grounding us together, making that foundation of a relationship with us, and then being able to go into the work of it.
Thanks, Sabaa. I think, one of the questions we asked in the interview was, how do you want us to be accountable to you? And I think, so college funders, like, how are we accountable to our people, and who is it that we serve, right? I'm being really clear about that, because like Chris said, I think it's at least 2 layers. And we integrated the economic security program and the education program, and it's silly. It's disingenuous to not see economic security as a crucial issue for the people who are serving, the young people serving. Anyway, I'm just going to repeat things people have said. So instead of that, I'll say, I don't know what the answer is to how to get to the tipping point. I think it's the conversations. I think it's the growing recognition. I think it's also keeping in mind the things that don't belong in the education silo. Like, there's work happening in economic mobility, economic security, with wins, with important wins, right? So fast food workers in certain places now have a $20 minimum wage. That is awesome, but it is troubling when we can't pay more than $15 an hour for young people or adults working in youth development. Because frankly, the better pay is not here. You're going to have to make the choice of, I care about this so much, I am going to take less money. And that's a terrible choice to offer someone. So part of it is we need to up our game. And then I'm going to just name a couple of organizations who are doing the work, because I also worry about the capacity of organizations. You've got visionary leadership who's ready to speak directly, and only some people can feel comfortable speaking directly to funders and speaking truth to power, because that is difficult, right? So I don't want to put too much nonprofits alone to do it. I think funders need to lead and be active and get in front of this and say, is this happening, and what can we do, and start acting. And not because we're going to have perfect solutions, but if we don't start, we won't get anywhere. And then in California, Cal Nonprofits is following a bunch of legislation that could change things about reimbursement rates in California. There are a couple of bills that they're looking at. That's not the only one. Fund the People is doing national work around nonprofit workers and nonprofit compensation. Staffing the Mission is another organization. And then All Due Respect, I think, is fairly new and focusing on organizing, but compensation organizing and youth compensation. So here are some groups, and part of my work, I think, is just about mobilizing and organizing, connecting, and then seeing what's next and what do we do. Learn, act, learn, act.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think a lot of what you all are saying, it definitely requires, and you're sort of just exemplifying the example of doing it, that every one of you has really moved out of your like comfort zone or whatever anybody thought. I don't know if comfort zone the right word, but like the box that somebody would have put you in, or society put you in the job you were in, right? So funders, can you really talk honestly to them? Can you, isn't the power relationship between funders and grantees something that we always complain about, but nobody ever sort of figures out a way to change? What is it that even would allow somebody to progress and change that relationship? And then for you all in the nonprofit leadership, just actually stepping into that role of asking for what you need and speaking clearly and focusing on your power and your worth as people who are in the sector providing, economic impact in your community and life-changing programs for kids. So it's like every one of you has kind of, instead of stayed in these, kinds of the culture, I guess, of the way that these relationships have been for so long, you've actually just stepped out of it. Like you're stepping out of it and you're doing it in a different way, which is super inspiring. And what I also like is that you've told us the specific ways that you've done it, right? Because sometimes I think it's, oh, how would anyone do that? Okay, so example, Pui Ling and Sabaa just said, like you're actually creating an agreement with each other about how to work, and the way that you talked about that, Pui Ling, was, how do you want us to be accountable to you? How many funders even say that, right, to their grantees? Like that is actually pretty revolutionary. And then you, Chris, saying that you left the meeting like, oh, we're getting some real talk, right? But wanting that, actually, not getting all, why is anyone talking to me like that? So I think that seems like a very important, but maybe unsaid undercurrent of having the success in this work that you're trying to do, that everybody needs to be brave enough to be in their jobs and their relationships in a new way. So I think that's super powerful. Anyways, does anybody have any thoughts about that?
I might just say, and this is easy for me to say as a funder, but also a nonprofit that seeks out funding from other funders. So I realize that I'm in a privileged position, kind of as an organization or an institution that has resources that maybe not everybody always can do this, but to some extent, we have large foundations, global national foundations in our region. And I think what we find is when we're open and transparent and direct about these conversations and these types of issues, it deepens the relationship. Now, not always. Some of our colleagues in our region are experiencing some of the ups and downs of this. But I think if we don't have these conversations, we may not have the relationship we already thought we did. Maybe purely like you got funding this cycle, you may not next cycle. And so how do we have that open dialogue so the relationship deepens beyond the latest grant? Because I think in many cases where we do have those deeper relationships, that's more sustainable support that will come and happen because we've been willing to. Now, I say that's easy to say because, every dollar that we're, trying to secure is critical. And sometimes, we need those resources and we have to have them. But at the same time, if we don't deepen the relationship in those ways, I think it's, we'll have further jeopardy of that sustainability.
Right, right. Other thoughts on this?
Kathleen, do you mind restating the question? I got a little.
Oh, it wasn't so much a question, it's just an observation about how you, as like a component of this, you have each really exemplified how to change the underlying relationship or the way that relationship has been between funders and grantees to make this work, like stepping out of your kind of like, what people think is your stereotypical role and stepping into a different, more direct, more equitable, more power shifting, sharing relationship with your grantees, and how that is actually it's super important to what you're trying to achieve. So I know, Elia, Rosario, did you put something in the chat? Did you want to come off mute and talk about your question? I don't want to call you out, but I can't really read your whole question in the chat because multitasking. But if you would like to, you're welcome to come off mute and pop into the conversation for a minute. Here you are. Terrific.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
And introduce yourself too.
Oh, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Elia Rosario with the Partnership for Children and Youth here in California. And the question did not formulate very clearly for me, but more, the recognition that so much of youth workers are also now school district staff. There's huge opportunity. And so, how can these kinds of formulation of new relationships, like new partnerships between local funders, local community-based organizations, and school districts, be sort of talking about equitable compensation and strategies of working differently across organizations to ensure that we're raising all boats, if you will, of those that are working with young people. There's so many more protections and wage increases or protections that school district staff, it's not, they're not necessarily done right with that work, but just sort of that added sort of complexity and feeling like there's some really great models of, again, new ways of partnering and new ways of collaborating. And so I'm just thinking about how we can bring in our school district folks who are also thinking about this issue.
I want to address that a little bit. So we specifically work at 5 different high schools in Oakland, and then we spend a lot of our time in East Oakland at Castlemont High School. And I think one of the things that we've realized is that one of the things that we're doing right now is really looking about how they're getting compensated with retirement, with time off, with summers off, and all those other kind of benefits that school staff receive. We're trying to implement that with our own staff too. Right now, we're looking into increasing our benefits. We just added 3 more weeks of restoration weeks for our staff. So just trying to figure out ways of being able to kind of up our game to be able to match that has been one of the things that we've been really working on in the last year or so. And it's really hard because our staff can see what people are getting paid, for example. And it's really kind of hard to say like, hey, I understand this, and they also get pensions and da-da-da-da. So it's also about thinking about, right now, we just matched all of our staffs for 403B, for example, so doing stuff like that, I think really helps support our staff in schools too.
I would echo Sabaa. We work with one of our closest partners, Kalamazoo Public Schools, to look at what they are paying their staff, what they are getting. It is a huge competition because they get their summers off. And so like, what is it we're able to do we're basically doing similar jobs, right? We're not in a classroom all day long, but we're in classrooms in school time, and we're in classrooms out of school time, and other community organizations. I do think we could do a better job of having more transparent conversations together not only with our school districts, but also with other community-based organizations. And I'll throw in the funders in there as well, because again, just looking at the project of Hub One, and I'm sure the Endeavor Fund, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years, this is really a, decade-long, if not longer, project, taking nonprofits and pay and all of the other infrastructure and HR with it, and moving it out of scarcity and non-existent to existent. Even thinking about the Hub One, I mean, there's a lot of legal involved with raising pay, making sure you're doing it in an equitable way across a compensation structure within an organization. And so I will just say, as representing Hub One, I know there's a few others on here from Hub One, and I know they do thumbs up, but we're open to, we're inviting anyone to have transparent conversations with us about this and to partner locally and nationally, because I think that the more we can collectively begin to have these conversations together, it becomes more of a movement and a force to make change.
Did you come
I'm
off
looking
mute,
at time.
Pui Ling? Yeah.
I did, but I'm looking at time, and I just want to echo Danielle and say, yeah, I think there's lessons to be learned, right? Because people are doing this. And so in San Francisco, there was a mandated increase in the wages for childcare workers, and it happened last year, and there are lessons learned from that. There are unintended consequences, and we should look at all those things because there are regional impacts, right? Like, people are going to be paid higher in San Francisco. They can't afford their affordable housing anymore. More people applying for the jobs in San Francisco, Antioch, and Pittsburgh. And we're driving the continued regional trends of displacement, wealth, and equity while we're trying to address one part of the problem. So the more we can learn the lessons with each other, we don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. And I a couple of things that you've said, Pui Ling and others too, really make me think about all the ways that we have to do some silo busting, because everyone is kind of in there. Okay, we're out of school time, or over here education, and over here economic justice, and over here, health justice or whatever. And it's really very, very we really need to be intersecting more and learning more from what's happening in other fields, and also understanding how one thing really impacts another. So I know we're going to run out of time. I think we have one more question we can probably get in from Wakia. I don't know if I'm saying that name right, but correct me, please, if I'm not. And would you like to come off mute?
Yeah, my name is Wakia, Chief. It's kind of a tricky name.
Can you say it again? Sorry.
Wakia, Chief.
Wakia,
So hands are
okay.
almost silent.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you. I work with the Shrine River Youth Project, and I'm new to the nonprofit world. And so I'm just really interested in ways that, funders, or that we, as grantees, that we could look to holding funders accountable, or ways that you think that as funders that you should be accountable to grantees.
Great.
Speaking
Yeah,
of,
go ahead.
But I think it's a question for everyone, and I appreciate Danielle's answer. I think we should say what we mean and do what we say. I think that we should examine our practices and recognize where we are doing harm, perpetuating injustice and unjust systems. So I'm looking at project-based one-year grants that our line items are nickel or diming folks. And also recognizing that we have our structures. And so I need to get approval from my board to make the decisions are made by the board, right? And so I work within my structure to get what I can for the communities that I'm here to serve. And so it might be being able to say to a community or an organization, we're going to be here with you for the long haul for the rest of everything. I don't know, but like Chris said earlier, foundations are fickle, right? And they're based on people, and they're based on who gets to decide and who gets to recommend. So whatever it is, be transparent, say what you mean, do what you say.
I'll add to that and say that, Hub One set out from the very beginning to be a journey of learning and sharing those learnings. And even throughout, our compensation revamping project, we misstepped many times, and we pivoted many times based on what we were learning, and we shared that with funders. We shared that with other organizations and each other. And I will say that I would think the same should happen with funders. We've experienced missteps with funders during this project, and we've had to have really direct, open conversations, and they've been scary and hard, and I've left the room almost wanting to throw up, but I think that my expectation too from our side would say, here's what we're learning and pivoting and making mistakes on, and funders as well, that accountability of really looking at yourself as a funder and saying, we're going to make mistakes too, and how do we hold ourselves accountable to that, and how do we come back to the nonprofit and say, you know what, we messed up, and here's how we're going to fix it with you. Because if we're going to look at, and I know Shadi's on here, shout out to Shadi from Trust Based, but if we're going to look at trust-based philanthropy, we need to have those conversations and apologize and pivot after we make mistakes and share our learnings with each other, and not penalize for those mistakes, because there's so much learning even in what we've done in the last 4 years that can prevent other nonprofits from making those same mistakes trying to change compensation within their organizations.
Yeah, thanks for that, Danielle. And I think there's ways too that funders can help build the capacity and resource the sharing of the lessons, because that takes money. Apologies, and thank you for catching that, Pui Ling. Elena Smith, I'm probably not saying it right. Tell me.
It's Elena.
Elena.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you'll be the last question because we're going to run out of time, but we want to get your question in.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate you squeezing me in. I was wondering if anybody on the call, and this is kind of tagging on to a previous question from, I think it was Elia, regarding silo busting for the workforce development pathways and pipelines for future youth development workers, childcare workers, and educators. Do you know of any existing intentional, like high school work-based experiences or college prep experiences that are weaving in development in all of these discrete sectors that, in my estimation, should be one educator development pathway?
I don't know. I can talk about what we do organizationally. So one of the kind of cool things about OKF2 is that we have a really solid pipeline. So a lot of out of 13 of our staff, 6 are alumni from our programming. So we specifically really try and focus in on being able to develop that pipeline. In addition to that, OUSD also has a pipeline, Oakland Unified School District, which we work really closely with, also has a pipeline for youth workers to become teachers and becoming educators in that kind of way, which is, I think, is also another kind of a cool way of being able to develop that pipeline. But I think it's also around how we see Oakland youth really working, being able to have Oakland staff be able to live in Oakland, also be able to serve Oakland youth. So it's also about being able to develop the infrastructure of that to make that even a livable thing, because a lot of our staff right now, our younger staff specifically, are still living with their families, for example, because they can't even afford rent on their own over here. So it's also about being able to both develop the infrastructure of that pipeline, but also being able to do the programmatic part of it too.
I think that question could really launch us into a whole nother program, which we should absolutely do. And we'll call on you, Elena, to help us with that, because I know there's probably a lot of people on the call right now who've done this pipeline work and are doing it and figuring it out, particularly around the educator youth worker intersection. So we will take that and really dig into that for a future program. So thank you for asking that. I want to thank Chris and Sabaa, Danielle, and Pui Ling for your time today. We learned a lot from you. You're really trailblazers, and we're wishing you all the best luck and fortune and good spirits for the initiatives that you're doing. And we want to keep checking in with you. I know you'll continue to be a part of this community, but we are really excited to understand how this goes, what you're learning, what you're accomplishing, and how you're really leading for the field. So we appreciate you. And we hope, thank you everybody for joining us today, and we hope you have a terrific weekend.